Was Abraham Lincoln a president?
Yes.
Oh, I thought he was just a whatever publical figure.
Welcome back to Delulu Diaries, where the timelines don't match, but the receipts always do. Yesterday I posted a quick update video about Amberlynn, and you guys in the comments reminded me about Horsegate, which honestly I barely remember, so I thought some of you might not remember either. So we're going to go ahead and re-review that. But before we get into that, I want to go ahead and show my appreciation for anyone who has sent me fan art or super chats, as well as to all of my incredible members. I do have 2 tiers available, as well as a Patreon I'll link below if you would like to support me over there. And it really does mean so much to me that any of you are wanting to do that. It makes a big difference for me, and I work really hard to make the memberships worth it. However, if you would like to support me in a way that is free, just liking and subscribing helps grow our community so much, so I really appreciate all of you no matter what way you want to support the channel. Anyways, let's go ahead and get into what you came here for. So a couple of days ago, Tommy posted a TikTok of her going horseback riding, and it was right before Amber made her Discord public, and so that's why I thought it was relevant, and that's what led up to everybody reminding me about Horsegate, so I just wanted to let you guys know where we're at. Someone did comment and say, your love for things that weigh around a half ton never ceases to amaze me, and I thought that was funny, so I did put that in. But what we're really here to talk about is that somebody asked if our girl, meaning Amberlynn, likes horses too, and Tommy says she's afraid of horses, but I'm hoping to be able to change that. Now, let's look at what Amber had to say in 2023 about horses. So somebody asked, would you ever try horseback riding when you lose enough weight? And she said, regardless of my weight, I'll never sit on an animal, which is not a terrible take. You should not be sitting on most animals, but obviously horses are a little bit different. Somebody says, sorry, do you think riding a horse is unethical? And she says, horses feel pain while being ridden. I'll let you decide what you think of that on your own. Now, she does cite a source, which I was very, very surprised by. So somebody responds to that and says, horses do not feel pain while being ridden. Equestrian of 15 years, please don't share uneducated takes. And then Amber shares her source, which, if you can see, is from a vegan website that says, horse riding cruelty. What you need to know. And it's from the Minimalist Vegan. The next one is a little bit cut off, but somebody says, stop spreading misinfo about horses and horseback riding. And Amber responds, your pressed my opinion isn't uneducated. My opinion is about ethics. I don't think people should be riding animals because they do feel it, and it isn't a comfortable feeling, period. But if you ride horses, go for it. That's your choice. I'm just saying that I don't like it. Somebody else says, the thought of riding horses makes me uncomfy too, and Amber responds, yes, just morally and ethically it seems wrong. If horses love exercising, hell yeah, let's exercise horses. But we don't need a 170 meat sack on top of the poor baby. That wouldn't be comfortable for anyone, or especially any animal. Especially when it's hours long. Don't even get me started on stupid horse carriages. Which, to that, I'll say, first of all, I think it's interesting that she chose her goal weight to be the amount of weight on top of the horse. The second thing I thought was kind of interesting is that her example of what not to get her started on was horse carriages. And based on the article that she cited, I thought that she would use a different example. Speaking of the article, I do want to go ahead and give it a quick read. I'm going to put the article up on the screen for you guys as we go through it, but I'm not going to read it out word for word because it is pretty lengthy. However, if you want to pause and make sure I'm not leaving out any important context, I am going to have the majority of the study up on the screen, and then I will have it linked in the description box below if you are curious to read the full thing. That being said, just before we get into it real quick, please keep in mind that I am a girl world reaction channel, not a researcher. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. I didn't look into this for hours and hours and hours. I just read the article that she cited, and then I looked around the internet slightly more to get a little more information because I do think that a vegan source was most likely going to be biased against this topic. So that is the level of research I put in. I was not doing like a college essay on this horseback riding issue, and we can't all have 140 IQs like Amberlynn. So just, again, take that with a grain of salt, but let's go ahead and get into this article. It's worth noting that the article she chose actually is pretty balanced, especially for being a vegan source. It starts off with why riding is considered to be good for horses. It does acknowledge that it's difficult to determine if it's good or bad, but that riding can be an effective form of exercise, which Amber does say in her responses. And so I do believe that she may have actually read the article. Also, when I looked it up, it wasn't the first thing that popped up. So I do think that she may have searched for this one, but it was 2 years ago. So I don't know what the algorithm was like back then. It goes on to say that riding can provide stimulation and enjoyment. It also says equestrian researchers note that heavy breathing and snorting are signs that a horse feels relaxed when ridden, and that, of course, that's not always the case. It lists a couple of things that you can look for, but basically, to me, this is getting into the fact that you just have to pay attention to how the horse is feeling while you're riding it. They say experienced equestrians who develop a deep connection with their horses usually have a good grasp on the personality and mood of their horse and adjust the riding approach accordingly. It also mentions that horses do get food, shelter, and protection in exchange for the riding services that they provide, and that domesticated horses live a lot longer than horses in the wild. Some sources citing that they literally live twice as long, with 15 years old on average being the lifespan of a wild horse, whereas 25 to 30 years is average for a domestic horse, and some of them live longer than that into their 40s, and even one living up to 62 years old, which is kind of incredible. Now, this is the part that Amber was referencing. It's the part of the article that says, "Do horses feel pain when ridden?" And I was kind of surprised at how little this backs up her point. It says that horses do feel varying pain levels and discomfort when being ridden, especially depending on if they have any pre-existing health conditions and the experience of the rider, things of that nature. However, there are some situations where horses don't feel significant pain when ridden, providing that riders can determine the optimal riding conditions for a relatively pain-free riding experience. It does go on to say that in order to understand pain, we have to understand horse lameness, which is a term that is used to describe a horse's change in gait, which is the way they move, and that's usually in response to pain somewhere in a limb, but also possibly as a result of a mechanical restriction on movement. So basically saying that you can tell that a horse is not feeling good by the way that it moves, which I didn't really think needed any research on that. You can usually tell when an animal is in pain, but I guess they wanted to be very thorough in what they were talking about, make sure that nobody was confused. They did cite a comprehensive framework for calculating lameness, which I am not going to include here because it was just a lot of very in-depth science and math. And again, this is Girl World. I'm not trying to get all into that. I just wanted to take a look at what Amber was using as her source. This is the last part I'm going to read out because it's the part that hits the closest to what Amber was talking about. And I do think that there is some confusion over what this article is actually saying. So this part says, "Is it cruel to ride horses?" And it says, "Horses don't want to be ridden, at least before training, and that research shows that riding causes lameness and discomfort. So on this basis, horseback riding is cruel." It goes on to say that, for example, competitive horses need to undergo extensive training and are regularly pushed outside of their comfort zone. And riding lessons can go wrong if the weight and height of the participant doesn't match the appropriate threshold for the horse, but the trainer looks the other way and proceeds anyways. What this tells me is that this article is basically saying that there is a lot of ways that you can ride a horse in an ethical way where the pain of the horse is limited to something similar to what humans would feel going to the gym. And in exchange, they get to literally double their lifespan and are taken care of by people who love and care about them, meaning that those people are providing shelter, food, enrichment, all in exchange for being able to ride these horses for a short period of time. Most horses are not being ridden 24/7. Where it goes wrong is when human intervention happens to the point where people just look past the discomfort and pain of a horse and continue going, whether that be to train somebody who is too large for the horse or to do competitive things that are, to earn money, and they're basically not treating the horse as a beloved animal, but rather as a tool to earn money. Let's use another real world example just to really get into the meat and potatoes of this. So as an example, there's nothing wrong with eating and feeding yourself. And in fact, it's good in many ways. Just like when you're horseback riding, it is good for them to get a little bit of exercise. So feeding yourself is fine. However, there are some people who will go past the point of pain to feed themselves, and that can cause a lot of what in the horse world is known as lameness and discomfort. So, for example, if somebody were to feed themselves to become around, let's say, 600 pounds, obviously that would be unideal for the human frame, and you would have to push past a lot of discomfort to get to that level. And in horse terms, you would say that if their movement is changed, that can show discomfort, such as being able to waddle into a store rather than being able to walk comfortably as most people are able to do would be a sign of discomfort. Now, do people go into this where they sometimes do push themselves past the point of comfort in order to continue eating? Yes. And in the same way that horses are sometimes pushed outside of their comfort zone by a person, this can also happen when we're talking about eating. There are some people who will assist another person to eat past the point of discomfort, and that can become very, very cruel and in many cases dangerous. So that's all this horse article is really saying, is just that, it is possible to make horse riding very unethical and morally incorrect, but it's not that every horse rider is going to be doing that behavior. It's just that there are some communities in which that kind of behavior is a little bit more encouraged. And so those are the areas that we should be restricting down on and policing. The average person that owns horses and is taking care of them is able to ethically ride horses. There are ways that you can make the pain less for a horse. And in general, as they said before, receiving so much in terms of like the food, shelter, and enrichment in exchange for being ridden for a short period of time is very worth it. And so we just have to take that into consideration when we're talking about this topic. Again, I'm a Girl World creator, so I don't know a lot about horses. If you feel that horse riding is unethical in every case, that's completely fine. But where I come down on it, based on the source that Amber cited, as well as a little bit of outside research, is basically that if you're doing it correctly, it's no worse than just going to the gym and experiencing a little bit of discomfort in that way. So the last thing that I think is worth mentioning is the fact that, according to Tommy, Amber says that she's afraid of horses. So I don't even know if she really ever had this ethical dilemma with the horses to begin with. I think it's more likely that she is afraid of horses and knows that that's not something that she would ever do. And so why not take the moral high ground on the issue? That being said, I was surprised that she cited a source and that the source was not that bad. I do think that she kind of misconstrued the information within the source, but hey, it's Amber. What do we expect? Anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you have any opinions on the horse situation, if you think that she really thinks it's morally wrong, or if she was just using that as an opportunity because she knows that she'll never be able to ride a horse anyways, and how you feel about her being with somebody who horse rides now, having the opinion that it is ethically wrong. If you made it this far, you already know. Stay Delulu, but not that Delulu. I'll catch you in the next one.